We check in now with Chris Herrod, who is challenging Representative Curtis for the party nomination. Chris, welcome to Inside Utah Politics. Great to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Glenn.
Not the first time we've had you on the show, because you were right in this exact same position just last year.
Yeah.
So what was it about analyzing this situation that made you want to jump into this race and challenge now Representative Curtis again?
Well, there was a couple of things. First, I thought there would be another conservative that jumped in the race. And then on the last day, when no conservative had jumped in, I talked to my wife and decided to do it. There was only one signature gather, which means that there was most likely to be a two-way race. Last time there was a three-way race, and so Tanner Ainge and I split the conservative vote. And so one of the biggest motivations was just having that one-on-one head. But I do believe this district deserves a conservative.
Talk about that, because you've been making a lot of that, conservative. What specifically do you mean by that, and how do you fit the mold, and in your mind, Representative Curtis doesn't?
Well, in the debate, Curtis said that my brand of conservatism is extreme. Well, I'm a Mike Lee, Ted Cruz type of conservative, and so if he thinks that's extreme, then he must have a different view. And during the debate, a number of those things came out. He's an ardent supporter of the UTA's BRT, which was a $200 million project that saves 8 minutes on a bus route. I gathered signatures, was opposed to it. I think that's wasteful spending. One of the big things is they went after government money, which I think the federal government is broke, and we've got to make sure that we cut down. I think it's a national security issue.
What would be your solution, and how do you as an individual go about trying to chip away at that?
Well, there's two ways. One of the things that you can do is what we did here in the state of Utah when I was a legislator, is you always pass a base budget that's about 5%, 10% of last year's budget. That way, if everything falls apart, the government still runs. Well, they use crises back in D.C. to make people vote for these ridiculous bills. The other thing that you have to do is, there's going to be a record number of freshman legislators this year. There's 56 Republicans that aren't running again. And what I want to do is go back and build a coalition and get 30 or 40 of us together and say, hey, Speaker, don't put us in this situation. We're not going to vote for a spending bill unless it has a 10-year plan to get us back to a balanced budget, because it has to stop. And so those are two concrete ways that we can get back to a balanced budget.
When you talk about your conservative approach and getting things done in Washington, doesn't it take giving and take with Democrats, though? Because you're going to have to get some Democrats on your side on most major issues.
Well, if there's a true compromise, that's fine, but too many of the compromises that we've had over the last couple decades have just moved us to the left. But there are certain things I don't think you can compromise. A difference is that we have is on the Second Amendment. For me, the Second Amendment is not theoretical. I have friends who have lost both their parents to Stalin's gulags. Within a decade of Stalin taking guns away, he starved to death 7 to 11 million Ukrainians in my wife's native country. And yet John has been willing to, put forward that he doesn't think anybody younger than 21 should be able to buy a rifle. For me, that's offensive to our young men and women around the world who can carry a fully automatic weapon in the military and can push buttons that destroy complete blocks, and then you're going to tell them that they can't come home and buy a .22? You're going to tell our young women who are 18 that they can't carry to protect themselves from rape? To me, that's a major difference between our view of the Second Amendment.
What does need to be done to address gun violence here in our country, though?
Well, there's two things. First thing, I think we know now that gun-free zones don't work. And so, when we talk about, I think it's a valid concern to, if you go pay your traffic ticket, there's an armed guard in justice court, but there's not one in schools. And so I think that's a legitimate issue. But the big thing for me is I believe that states can take care of it. I don't have a problem with teachers who want to carry. I think that's actually a very good way to combat that. But my big concern is that we don't talk about the truth of the Second Amendment or what's happening. It is still safer. It's 800 times more likely for a child to die from a traffic accident to be shot at school, 400 times more likely to die from underage drinking than to be shot at school, and 200 times more likely to die from accidental poisoning. But we don't talk about banning automobiles, alcohol, and bleach. And so for me, that needs to be also given a perspective. I spoke at a Second Amendment rally about 2 months ago up at the Capitol. And then I went around to the front, and there was this anti-gun, anti-Second Amendment rally. Well, there was 1,000 kids there that were being used as pawns. They were genuinely frightened, but somebody needs to be the adult. Yes, we get your concerns, but there are so many other things that you need to be more concerned about if we really care about school safety. I mean, kids are more likely to be hit from school buses than to die from guns. And so we need a realistic perspective. And if we don't talk about that, kids will grow up with a fear of guns, and when they can vote, we'll simply get rid of the Second Amendment.
On the debate on Tuesday night, you mentioned the times that Mayor Herrod, when he was mayor in office and raising taxes. Mm-hmm. Is there never a time to raise taxes in that situation? Would you have not done that at all in his shoes?
You know, not especially not the way that he did it, because what happened is rather than he wanted to use, you know, I haven't raised property taxes, because if you raise taxes with property taxes, you have to go through a truth and taxation hearing. Well, when you raise energy prices, you don't have to go through that. When you double the fees of wastewater, you don't have to do that. And so for me, it was all about his service at Provo was all about him, you know, so that he wanted to be shown, but he did raise taxes, and he didn't do it through a transparent method. If you do it through a transparent method, that's fine. But, you know, again, but I think most Utahns don't want their taxes. You know, if he keeps up with inflation level, that's fine. But I don't think you should raise taxes for additional projects like he did.
Mail-in ballots are start going out this week. A few weeks left. What's your strategy going down the stretch? I have about 10 seconds left. You
know, the biggest thing is just to make sure that people go out and look at the record. I think you can Google my record. You can Google John's record. You know, you can look at the things that I'm concerned about. I'm greatly concerned about the way that he handled the sexual harassment issue with Chief King, and people need to look into that.
Coming up, opponents of Count My Vote have kept the initiative off the ballot, but is the battle over? We're going to take a look after the break.